We found it in Colombia, going quite high altitude, near the border with Venezuela. The variety is called luxurians, much larger flowers than the normal Boliviensis.
Really?
Yes.
It's the kind of plant you can sort of suddenly point out as being, I've got Boliviensis, but this is far more superior.
Oh, yeah. Oh. Started off in Mexico and went all the way down to Panama. In Panama, we were finding 2-meter tall plants growing as epiphytes, so 20 meters up in the trees. You can imagine the job we were getting to collect the seed off them.
Hello and welcome to episode 86 of Talking Dirty, over at East Ruston Old Vicarage, looking bedecked in red. Or is that a sort of salmon? I'm not sure. It is our happy and very handsome horticulturalist, Alan Edward Herbert Gray.
It reminds me of my mother, you know, when she used to go shopping, she used to say to the shopkeeper, "I'd like a tin of salmon, please. Would they be red or pink, Mrs. Gray?" "Oh, red," she used to say. "Red was superior." And it is red. Now, over in Norwich, we have the beaming, the beautiful, the ever bubbly Thordis Maria Sophia Fredriksson.
Also in red, I got the red memo.
You got the red memo.
I'm a little bit overexcited today because I've seen a little sneak peek at the show and tell that's on the way with this week's guest, brand new to Talking Dirty. First ever appearance of Chris Davey of Seagate Nurseries in Lincolnshire. Welcome. We've been having a little look around your potting shed before this podcast started. And on the video, I don't know if you agree with me, Alan, but this looks like some sort of Designers Guild wallpaper in this potting shed. Don't you agree?
I love it when people elevate a shed to above shed status. You know,
That's it.
When you think of a shed, you sort of think of dusty old cobwebs and mess and rubbish everywhere. But look at that. What is that wallpaper, Chris? Is it seriously wall?
No, it's sort of chipboard, and it's been painted with a blue paint. And of course, it misses bits. So there's the wood effect coming through a very sort of sky blue paint.
Well, I didn't realise just how much of an influencer you are, Chris.
It'll be everywhere by the end of next week.
Yeah.
Now, people will associate the name Seagate with irises. You've changed the name of the nursery because obviously you're ever expanding and burgeoning onwards, but irises are very much the heart of what you do, which is why if you're watching the video, you can see several rather alluring iris blooms over Chris's shoulder. But you haven't been at the helm of the nursery really for all that long, and I suppose a big chunk of it has been COVID.
It has, unfortunately, yes. So Kate, my wife, and I have always had a passion about running a nursery. We've always been avid sort of, going to nurseries every weekend and finding new plants, something unusual. And in the back of our mind, it was like, if we had the opportunity to do this, we'd grab it. And then we came in here in early 2018, sort of April, well before season, just to buy one plant. And I got talking to the chap who used to own it. And as I walked out, I said, "See you later in season." And he said, "No," he said, "I'm trying to sell the place, and we might not be here." And I said, "Well, really?" And he said, "Yeah, absolutely." He said, "Buy the place if you want it." Kind of a throwaway comment, really. And after a couple of hours and chatting and what have you, I just jumped in 2 feet without telling my wife. She was livid, absolutely livid. How are we going to do it? What are we going to do? How are we, every single question was going around our minds. And lo and behold, on the 25th of May that year, we completed. And we took it on in like the height of the flowering season. And it's just been the biggest learning curve since then, to be honest with you. So it was really passionate at the start, but my head is on now, I think. I'm getting there.
What I love about this is so many people can understand that feeling of going to a nursery to buy one, maybe two things and coming away with a trolley full. None of us, I don't think, have come away with the nursery.
No. So my wife sympathises with customers. When you get like a couple who come in and the husband saying, "Darling, I think we've got enough now," my wife always jumps in and goes, "Well, it can't be any worse than him,"
It's funny, isn't it? Because gardening is so often like bite by bite. You take bigger chunks of the apple, you get more addicted, you discover more plants. And obviously, like now, Alan, at your garden, you came with a certain amount of experience and you kind of added bits of land, and it was a big challenge and there was a lot to undertake, but you could kind of, I suppose, do it bit by bit. I can't quite get my head around the idea of launching into a nursery mid-peak flowering season of all the irises and just sort of having to hit the ground running.
But I think in actual fact, if you think about it in a funny sort of way, that would be an absolutely ideal time because, you know, as Chris said, the irises were all flowering, it's peak season and all the rest of it. They are going to sell themselves virtually because, you know, you don't need to worry too much about that aspect of it, I don't suppose. And, you know, all right, so it's a learning curve. But when you've got the kind of passion that Chris has, which he obviously has a passion for plants, I mean, that's the key to the whole thing, I think. And the same with me, I have a passion for plants and I'm spitting now, everywhere.
We should have called this podcast A Passion for Plants, and then fewer people would have ended up listening to something they really didn't mean to when they searched for Talking Dirty. Chris, so what was that first season like then, getting to know all of these amazing irises?
Yeah, so naturally it was, you know, at the point of closing it, so it was sort of at a point where it needed a lot of work doing to it and sort of renovating. So really it was like getting the lawnmower out, finding the paths, weeding some of the beds. We soon discovered that the labelling was a little bit hit and miss, so some varieties were sort of going around avidly identifying different plants. And there was about 450, 500 varieties approximately in the beds at the time. Since then, we've increased to over 1,000 varieties in bearded irises alone now. And we have loads of different Sibiricas and daylilies and all sorts of other stuff growing in the beds, like the Pheum collection is now making its way, pushing irises out of the way in the shady spots. So it's really finding what I had, if you like, for that first year, and then working out what I was going to do with it.
And I suppose having irises at the heart of your collection, they just, I suppose some people, they have a short season. And so some people might, you know, if you've got a small garden, maybe only have one or two. And I speak for myself there because I only have a couple. But I think the allure of the iris, I don't know if there's anybody in the world who could honestly say hand on heart they don't like them. They just, when they're in bloom, they are so beautiful and such a vast array.
That's it. And they're quite early too, aren't they, compared with lots of other plants? So they have I always think they're a bit like myself, really. They're quiet most of the time, but when they start talking, you can't shut them up. You know, they're just out there, you know, look at me, very, very showy. Even the smallest of ones are eye-catching. I think that makes them really quite unique for certainly this climate, you know, early season. So, we get a lot of people who come in who just would never have thought of having iris, and then they walk out with one. They can't help it.
But I mean, if you take the whole bearded iris community, from the babies to the through the intermediates and then to the big tall ones, I mean, you have quite a long season in actual fact, because the small ones start flowering very, very early. And I know somebody called Brian Ellis who's got a lovely collection of miniature bearded iris, which are ideal for people with only a small garden. And or if you've got a raised bed and sunshine, I mean, they are wonderful little plants for that. So you've got, I suppose you must almost have a 3-month-long season of flower there. But it doesn't just end there, because there's two other things that I think need mentioning. One is that some bearded iris are what they call rumentant, which means that they flower twice. I remember going to Ipswich many years ago, and I don't know Ipswich at all, and what happens? I get lost. Pre-sat-nav days, you know, and I remember going along this road, rounding a corner, and there was an island bed in the middle of the junction. And there on October the 5th was a lovely bearded iris, a sort of tawny-coloured bearded iris. And I looked at this and I thought, this is surreal. I mean, this is November. What's happening, or October, whenever, you know, autumn. And I sort of suddenly started to feel very strange, almost as if I was having an out-of-body experience, you know. And the other thing is, I think about bearded iris is I saw a lovely picture the other day, a lovely picture of Sarah Cook's iris beds, and they were a sea of red. It was Tulipa sprengeri. And it just grows in amongst her irises. And now we know that bearded iris, you'll tell us, Chris, bearded iris, they like to have their rhizomes in full sun and be baked.
That's right.
Yeah. So does Tulip sprengeri. And it's silk seeds all through her iris beds. And it looked absolutely stunning. There's an idea for you.
That's it. Companion planting is always the one of the sticking points for many people, because even like in the large displays of the large shows, they're almost always grown by themselves when displaying them. So yep. the biggest places people see them are always, they get in their heads that they need to be in a dedicated bed. Yep. But actually, if you're quite clever with the planting, like you say, you can include them almost anywhere in a planting plan. Or, you know, that's to say for those that plan their garden. I'm not like that. I tend to just plonk stuff in. But they're quite architectural leaves. I mean, we've got, I've got one just here. these large leaves, if they're breaking up a border of, behind a geranium, in front of maybe something even like a helianthus that's quite tall, they provide sort of an all-year interest as well. So quite often, if someone's a bit unsure, I say to them, well, if you think more about the leaf than the flower's a bonus then. And they do a job all the time then too.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Because plant them at the front of the border where they're going to get the most sun. Because as soon as the flowers are over, the flower stems go down, and you've just got these lovely fans of foliage. What's not to like?
Exactly. Man after my own heart.
And they're pretty good in this kind of time where a lot of people are thinking about drought planting and plants that are going to be kind of good for the environment. They're a good pick because obviously they like that sort of dry, baked position.
That's right. I think that as a plant group, it's got a lot of potential in the coming years. And I really enjoy it for that because I think it means that we can keep moving. I don't like stopping. I like to sort of always be on the move. And one way I sort of promote iris is there's two really. Firstly, the drought side, with the ever-changing climate, they need very little, or actually in the beds, no water at all. And of course, they can be planted almost anywhere, providing they get that sunshine. But that's not their biggest selling point for me. Their biggest selling point is that we can send them out anywhere in the country bare root. I mean, they require no compost, so they're immediately peat-free and no plastic. So they're absolutely, dare I say, on trend. They're a plant you can send out the most environmentally friendly way, but they can also cope with that environment when they get there. So I think that they're an underused plant, certainly.
I think they are too. I agree with that. And I think also when you actually see the range of some of the newer colours, if you like, I mean, there are one or two faults with I feel personally, with what the breeders are doing, because I think sometimes if you take an iris stem flower, it has 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 buds on each stem. The lower one opens first, then the next one. Sometimes the breeders, when they are seeking a new plant, they launch a variety and those buds are too close together. So you don't actually see the individual beauty of the flower because it becomes a muddled mass. They're all too close and lumpy and bumpy. And sometimes I feel rather too frilly as well, because, I mean, a typical iris resembles a fleur-de-lis. It should have that crown and the petals coming down. Sometimes that breeders slightly miss that, I think. But, I mean, I'd just like to ask you, Chris, I'm going to put you on the spot now. Give me 3 of your favourite bearded iris.
Well,
3.
3. My answer to that, in that when I'm here with the customers, is always the same. That's that everyone has got its own, attributes, but you can't beat them en masse. But for me, and my wife too, my wife's favourite is this variety here. So this always gets, this always gets a lot of attention. So this is called syncopation. I don't know if you can see, it's got this sort of antique gold standards, and these it's a kaleidoscope. It's a sort of pearlescent, every different shade in the falls. It's very, very interesting. It's a good doer too. One of the most important things before flower for me is it's a good garden plant, and this just does that. It's very sought after. It's one of those plants you have to really see to sort of appreciate. So I'll be selfish and keep it.
That's a stunning one.
But my first ever iris I ever bought, because I have a passion for yellow, which is great, is Pirate's Quest.
You do realise you just said something extremely unfashionable, don't you?
Oh dear. That's not on trend for me, my wallpaper.
No, yellow, because I said there's 2 ladies in the garden the other day. We've got a border here that's laying fallow at the moment. They said, what are you going to do with it? I said, I'm going to make a yellow border. Oh, well, we'll avoid that area then. I said, why? She said, yellow. And yellow is very unfashionable. People don't like it. And I like you. I mean, I would love that iris. I think that is stunning. Look at the colour of that. I mean, it's not just a plain flat yellow either, is it?
No, it's not. It's got an interesting white seam down the middle as well. So actually,
look at the different shades of yellow in that flower.
Exactly. I mean, like you say though, yellow seems to be, people get put off by it. But actually, I find the more gold yellows better than the more sort of lemony yellows. So they pop out the border, but actually when you get close to them, they sort of dull down to that gold colour. So they're not sort of stand out, because they can be a bit kind of loud in a border, can't they? But I like the idea of a yellow border though, so you've got it all together.
Well, I think it depends. It depends how you put plants together, doesn't it? You mentioned earlier on in our little chat here, but they're using the right plants with iris as companion planting, and I mean I think the same goes for using a colour or something in a border. My border used to be a red and purple border. Well, it won't be red and purple anymore because it's now going to be yellow. You just made my mind up, Chris. Thanks.
And I think you're ahead of the curve. I think you're continuing with your trend-setting, influencing ways, Chris, because all the best people, all the Rosie Hardys, etc., are on the yellow, go flying the flag for yellow. So yeah, it's the right way to be.
Absolutely. No, you've got to experiment too. I mean, I get a lot of people who suggest, have you ever thought about putting all of this colour together, or this colour together, or even the different heights and stuff? And actually, I have hundreds of varieties out of the ground from Maori all the way through to October. And so when I replant them, I've got a great array of different colours and style of plants and what have you. And I mix it up. And it's quite interesting because when you get 2 years down the line and they're really floriferous, you look at them and think, well, I wouldn't have put them together, but actually they work. And so you end up with this kind of a colour palette, if you like, with a few things already sorted out for you. So, always try something once.
Exactly. Well, you've started strong with a couple of really wonderful ones. So that yellow one was your first?
Yeah, so Pirate's Quest was my first, the yellow one here. But actually, if I was to pick a favourite at the moment, what's really caught my eye this year, not just the Siberians, but these smaller miniature tall bearded irises. So they are dainty. If you compare that with their tall bearded iris, the size difference is tremendous. You can lose them. But what they do is they bulk up really quickly, and they're quite short varieties. So they grow to around about 2 foot tall as a rule. They all vary slightly. But like Alan was saying about the buds coming out, most of them are well sort of branched. So as each flower comes out, there's another one beside it ready to come out. And they, as a rule, they all seem quite tidy plants. So the miniature tall beardeds are tall beardeds that are completely scaled down, and the foliage represents that too. So it's very, very narrow and quite sort of all compact. It's quite nice, really. It's literally like it's been scaled down. But they're just, I don't know, there's something about them this year. It's really drawn my eye. So I think I might be adding a few more of these to the collection at some point.
Yeah, and Alan's right. To add those to a front of the border, I can imagine some of those towards the front of my sunny front garden, and they would fit in really, really well. That's
right, and they're flowering at a time alongside the tall bearded. So if you want to carry a theme of irises through the beds, these at the front and some of the tall ones further back where they're still getting the sunshine, of course, you can then sort of run a theme through a bed or bed to bed through your garden then. So yeah.
So which have you got there?
So this one's Petit Monet. It's sort of a placata. So it's very, very sort of dainty. Sort of, I don't know if you can see that. I'm trying to get to grips with the camera. And then this one's called Maslon. I'm never very good at pronouncing names. I'm sure it should be pronounced with a French flair. But it's a more bolder, sort of striking variety. So it's so two contrasting ones, really, both of which catch the eye. It's interesting. The subtle ones I find are better in a bigger clump. So as a single stem, it would probably get lost, as this maybe not so much. But once they get into a big clump, you find that this almost becomes more eye-catching than the bolder colours. So it's ever-changing for me. Favourite irises is contentious. If you ask me tomorrow, it would be a completely different selection.
I understand that completely. I mean, that little mauve one you're handing, you just had in your hand there. Yeah, that reminds me of Mrs. Alan Gray from Chelsea Flower Show Thunder.
It does.
I'll just tell the tale if you like. But I mean, somebody came running up to me and said, "I've just seen your wife. Come this way," and to drag me off to the Suffolk Plant Heritage stand. And there was a bearded iris on that stand called Mrs. Alan Gray, spelled Alangray. How odd is that?
Isn't that a part of the foster irises from Lucy's Skelton?
Yes,
it was. Yeah,
that's it. Yeah, it's a marvellous little thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm going to grow that one.
Yeah, absolutely. It's nice to be able to keep some of those older varieties too.
Yeah.
Well, it is, because you don't know what they've got in their gene pool that might be useful in the future.
That's right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I must do my plug of the week and say that in the video version we will link to the Chelsea special we recorded where Alan talked a bit more about Mrs. Alan Gray. We'll obviously put the picture in this podcast as well, so you can lay eyes on it. I mean, obviously the thing with the irises is there's been so much breeding for such a long time, Chris.
That's right. Well, there's tens of thousands of different hybrids. At this time of year, my emails, in fact, I think I've just had one come through 2 seconds ago. It'll no doubt be somebody sending me a photograph, asking me to identify it, which is, to be honest with you, almost impossible from a photograph. But what's happened, of course, is that there's also lots of seedlings that aren't registered. So it's a huge, diverse range of different plants. But I think that keeps the interest too, because like myself, I went to a plant fair this weekend and I've come back with 2 new varieties. So it's you can't help yourself really. You spot something, it just looks slightly different to something you've already got.
Chris, are we surprised? I
No.
What is the name of the old dark purple, very early flowering bearded iris? Is that Iris germanica?
That is, yes, the species iris. So for us, that flowers weeks and weeks ahead of the rest of the tall beard hybrids.
And I was just going to say, I saw that out in a garden in Norfolk this year in February, which is amazing. Yeah. I mean, it's not normally as early as that, but it's end of March, beginning of April normally, but it's always the first one to flower, I think. Hasn't
it been a peculiar season, though?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we talk about irises, but we're about two weeks or more ahead here.
Exactly.
Than when we'd expect them to be. And last year was 2 weeks later.
Yeah.
So we're nearly 4 or 5 weeks different to last year. It's tremendous. I mean, I can't fault it. It's lovely to see them flower anytime, but we've definitely had some unusual plants at weird and wonderful times of year this year.
Yeah, exactly.
So behind your shoulder, there are many, many more wonderful blooms beckoning us. What would you like to show us next?
Well, I cut a vase full last night. I always think that an ever popular variety, Braithwaite, you can't go wrong with. People say that maybe it's a bit common, you see it all over the place, but there's a reason for that, and that's because it's a good grower. This one's not a great example. It's normally better branched, like we were just discussing, and you get a lot of flower power. So when it's a big clump, it's vigorous and very floriferous too. So you get an awful lot of flowers out of a clump of it, and it's just a standout, good old-fashioned variety. And people fall in love with the two-tone, I think, and it's simple. Yet it's still sort of showy enough. So that's always a good go-to plant. We've got, they're all these tall bearded grow at much the same sort of height. They're anywhere between 3 and 4 foot. You see quite often irises tall bearded listed at 36 inches, and that's kind of a happy average, if you like. Whereas the smaller varieties, obviously, they're down at like 2 foot. So this time of year, everything is up for some people eye level almost. So they're all very much the same. They all like the same conditions too. So it's quite a subjective plant because you can buy it almost on your colour palette or where you're going to plant it, which is great.
And then also, I suppose, if you're lucky and you know people who have a good established clump of a good doer, the irises in my garden, I only have a couple of varieties, and one of them, I have no idea what it is because it was just a non-gardening sort of friend of a friend who was looking to get rid of some. And I said, I'll have some. I'm starting a new garden. I need to fill a gap. And so no idea, but so vigorous and happy. And so, you might be able to gift some eventually if you have a happy clump.
Well, absolutely. The thing is that irises really do need dividing if you're going to divide them after they've flowered, which is in June, July, and which is a good time. You just dig them up, and Chris was saying that's a good time to send them out too, bare root. No plastic, no wrapping, nothing. Where you can put them in wax paper or something to keep them hydrated, I suppose. But it's a good time to divide and replant, and it's not in the busy season, if you like. It's a busy season for Chris because he's an Irishman. But it's not busy as far as gardeners go in a way. So you can do your irises when you've got time to do them and make sure that you're doing them properly.
That's right. That's another thing why what we do here works quite well, because obviously the irises are probably 50% of what we do.
Yeah.
But this is most of the workforce, and then my wife and children. So for us, it works really well because in the spring we're propagating like chrysanthemums and asters in the early part of the spring, and then as the temperatures rise, we move on to salvias and everything. We propagate as much of stuff as we can. We'll probably almost be 100% next year, and then of course as we go through the season, now it's about getting the plants out there and selling them and potting on and what have you. But then when everything drops off, and I'm kind of on that quiet time that a lot of nurseries experience over midsummer, it gives me the opportunity then, like you say, to sort of they fit in nicely for me. So nothing goes missed then. No. So as a workload, it means we can sort of manage it small then. Every order you see, every plant we do, we they're hand dug. It does take time, but they're worth it. They're such vigorous plants. A lot of people think when you start off with a single rhizome that's going to take years to bulk up. And actually, people come back after even a year sometimes and say, goodness, I put it in full sun like you said, and it's just going mad. I've had to give my neighbour some. You go, well, that's exactly, I told you it would. They don't see them making up. You can't watch them grow. They're one of them plants where you turn your back and all of a sudden there's a clump there.
I like a plant like that. They're my favourites.
Yeah, exactly.
So we've really been through quite a good spectrum already, from bright punchy yellows to two-tone affairs to something that's sort of paler and more subtle. What's next?
Well, there are bearded irises called space agers, and they're bearded irises, so they still have the beard through the centre of the falls, but they have in this case a horn, so a little flick on the end of that, as you can see. Really, there's a little flick there on the end of the beards. You stand against my fancy wallpaper, you might be able to see it then. There you go. So it's like interesting again. It's another type. This is thornbird. So this is a very popular. It's quite an old variety, or a reasonably old variety. Again, it's just another nice one. It's a bit more subdued, really. They're so subjective. Some people like bold colours, some people like sort of broken colours, or very showy, or sort of more tailored form, like the Braithwaite has got a more rounded form. So you tend to find that the older varieties are sort of more gentle and curved as the newer they get, become more free, like Alan said. Some of them are a little bit over the top, almost don't resemble an iris. So kind of wary of that when we try on new varieties to see how they look, to make sure they still look like a proper iris.
But then on the other hand, Chris, one man's meat is another man's poison. So what one person likes, the other one's not going to. So,
That's it. I mean, interestingly enough, some of the plants we introduced in the first couple of years, I got my wife to introduce, and also asked my mum to look and tell me which ones were her favourite, because you need other people to, especially obviously it's a business, and we want to cover as many bases as possible. Yeah. And sometimes you put a plant out and you think, well, that's my taste, and no one else is going to like it. And there's a few we've just recently brought over from America, and they're super plants, but they are very modern. And for a start, we thought, no one's going to like these. And then, you get a week where everyone's talking about a particular variety, and you think, oh, okay, so it's not just me then, It's because it's so subjective.
I'd have thought in a world of Dahlia Cafe au lait adulation and obsession, that kind of a more creamy, sort of subtle toned Cafe au lait coloured iris would have been very popular.
That's very true. I mean, the nice thing about those softer colours, of course, is that they almost go with anything to a point. Now, go away from that. One of the things I didn't appreciate when we took the nursery over, and I'm trying to cater for it, is people's obsession with black flowers. And you can see, if you put it against my hoodie, it kind of disappears, I think. So this is one of the darkest flowers we have on the nursery. It's actually English bred, so it's bred by a chap called Gary Middleton, who we work quite closely with. We have quite a few varieties on the nursery of his, and this is called Shadow of the Almighty. And it was a chance seedling. Its other brothers are black as well, but this is it's quite nice. It's got the old-fashioned sort of round. I don't know how easy it's going to be to say. It's got the old-fashioned sort of almost rounded, tailored form to it, but it's just very, very, very dark. There's a very slight purple glow to it on the standards, but the black, you've got a job to get any purple out of them at all. And these seem to be really sought after. Now, they're not really to my taste, I must admit. Black flowers haven't really sort of sat with me yet, but people really love them. And I think they're great if you've got a backdrop, particularly something like a red brick wall. Something like this really stands out. So it's always interesting, especially when you can contrast. You start putting flowers together, like bold colours together, and they really do start bouncing off each other.
Now you've made me want to make my border a black and white border.
Black and yellow. It'll be the bumblebee border.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I mean, that black is so lustrous and velvety looking.
It is, and you want to touch it. You really do. And like I say, I appreciate every flower, but it's just not something I've ever really considered. But they have. I mean, if anyone's ever actually got hold of an art, they are truly sort of velvety feel. It's hard to believe that the flower only lasts a few days, really, when it's robust enough and sort of, tactile, if you like.
They really are totally strokeable.
Oh, they are. Yeah, absolutely. But I always find it interesting. Like I say, everyone finds a place for an iris different. And we get a lot of like NGS gardeners that come in and they've got colour-coded borders, and they start walking around, and you know, like Alan here, they start talking about colour border, and all of a sudden it's, well, we could just fit this in, you know, maybe a yellow and black border. Yeah.
Rules are made to be broken, Chris, eh?
Alan, I'm interested to know where Alan would put that particular iris.
Well, I was actually just thinking what I would do with an iris like that. And I think what I would do, I'd have to have silver foliage around it to try and lift it a little bit. And also lime green foliage would look very nice with that. And also another plant I've just written down that I thought, which is as cheap as chips to buy. I mean, we talked about Sarah's iris beds being threaded through with Tulipa sprengeri, but allium, a little allium with dark purple, tiny little globes really, but I mean, it's very easy, is spherocephalum. And that is as cheap as chips. And you could, if you have an iris border or a front of a border with bearded iris, you know, it's nice to think of putting plants like that through the rhizomes. And another little chap that appeals to me is a South African bulb called Spiraxis. It's very, very bright colours. And if your soil is fairly light and you're in a fairly sheltered garden, that should be hardy for you. But you know, again, it's a plant that's relatively inexpensive, and I'm just thinking of some plants that you could pepper through some of those lovely rhizomes without causing too much shade. I know a friend of mine down in Somerset. She had a designated iris border, as lots of gardens in grand country houses did, and she used to thread her iris border through with lavender mist, which she'd sow every year. And I couldn't work out how lavender mist didn't shade the rhizomes, but it didn't seem to do any harm.
Yeah, there must be. I mean, you can imagine, because I've got these sort of large beds of about 20 something of them. So everything you try and keep as clean and tight as you can. But I do quite often, you know, wonder if I should be experimenting with companion planting, really, like a trial, if you like, to see what does work and doesn't.
Yeah,
there's some lovely combinations you see out and about.
I just planted one of my favourites as a low-growing bearded iris. It's called Langport Storm. I don't know whether you know that. What you do? Your face.
That's a super variety.
It is. It's kind of lurid colouring, though, isn't it? Because it's a dirty mauve with brown on it.
That's it. Yes, I mean, there's a lot to be. I mean, that's one of the more sort of common Langports, if you like. We've got a few of Langports here on the nursery. But I keep saying to people, there's something to be said for things like Jane Phillips. Some of these varieties, a lot of people come in, they poo-poo the varieties you can get from garden centres, if you like.
Yeah, but why is Jane Phillips so popular, Chris? Because she does so well.
Exactly.
And it's a beautiful blue flower. And you probably notice it on your nursery as much as anything, that blue flowers seem to sell just like that.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's fragrant. And then one of the things we find, particularly with Jane Phillips, is that if you don't lift it every 3 or 4 years, so if for whatever reason, you know, it gets missed a couple of years, it seems to keep carrying its flowers a bit further. So it'll go through, you know, it could be lifted 4, 5, 6 yearly, and it still holds flowers well. So I mean, it's a good doer. There's a reason why some of the older plants, although I love the specialities, there's a reason why some of these plants are so popular, and that shouldn't go unmissed, really. Because if someone comes in and they're looking for a plant to start with, quite often we'll point them in the direction of something like Jane Phillips and say, you know, once you've learned to work with a plant like this, it's such a forgiving plant and it'll give you so much back. Then you know, the world's your oyster then.
Yeah, exactly. I remember years ago buying an iris, and it's a very white with just a little bit of blue on it. It's called the English Cottage. Do you know that one?
That's right. Yeah. We grow it here.
Does that flower twice for you? Because it flowers twice for me.
Yes, occasionally. It's only recently been divided. I mean, my biggest trouble is most of everything, or everything I grow almost, is only about 4 years old.
Yeah. I appreciate
so a lot of the stuff, is yet to be established. But you spoke on about the Montan irises, English Cottage being one of those. But there's some varieties we find there's 3 or 4 that are reliable rebloomers that are definitely, you know, you can almost count on them again in October and November time. Yeah. But there are many varieties that just occasionally just throw a flower, and it's quite interesting. I think planting them is, you know, I don't know, I've never quite worked out how you plant an iris against autumn flowering plants. Whether they have their place in autumn, if you were to grow them for that season, I'm not sure.
It's a difficult one, Chris, because most autumn flowering plants, you're getting towards the end of the gardening year, I suppose, or when there is no end to it, I know, but the end of the floriferous season, shall we say, and most plants are then at their biggest and their best and their blousiest. Now, how do you fit irises into that? That is where they have to be at the front of a border, I think, or a designated border for just irises and a few other small growing things amongst them. But it is a difficult one. I know what you mean, but I think there's nothing more surprising. I go back to that October day in Ipswich when I got lost and coming across a clump of bearded iris looking splendid in October. I mean, it was just amazing. So I don't think we need to worry too much about it, because I think people would incorporate that into their gardens. But
I hope so.
I was just thinking, when you were talking about Remington irises, I just thought, well, people must not expect after dividing irises for them to flower in their first autumn, because they won't, because they've got to do their growing and their settling in first, and they might not flower until their second or even third year, twice yearly. So it is something you've got to consider. And maybe you might not want to divide your Remington irises every 3 years, because it would stop them being Remington.
That's the trouble, isn't it? But then, I mean, with that in mind, you could plant accordingly too. And also, if you're planting with Remontant irises in mind for that later sort of autumn season, why not go out with a bang and plant maybe 3 or 4 clumps? So when they do flower, they do make a statement rather than just going sort of mist in the corner. Large drifts, or maybe not drifts so much, but decent sized clumps, like you say, so lifted and divided, maybe less regularly. So when they do flower, they make it worth it.
I think that's a brilliant idea, and I think another ideal ideal pairing, because they're a similar season, is iris and peonies. If you plan a peony border, and peonies have a limited time, and you've got irises on the sunny side of the peony border, what better combination could you wish for, really?
That's right.
I am dying to put you on the spot and ask you what those 3 or 4 reliably Remontant varieties are.
I had a feeling when I said that. Probably the most reliable is a variety called Dawn of Fall. I don't have it, I'm afraid. It's gone over the bed, so I consciously thought of trying to grab some. So Dawn of Fall, it's a good, reliable plant. It's not the most showy, but because it's reliable, it's worth it, because it does definitely give you that second season. And we have a full line of it here, and last year the full line flowered again later in the season, so that was great. I mean,
what colour is that?
It's difficult to describe. It's quite subdued, sort of soft, sort of yellowy apricot, if you like. It's a bit, like I say, it's kind of, I don't know. It's more of a sort of this sort of colour, if you like. I'm not sure how you describe it, really. Very, very soft yellows.
Cafe au lait.
Yes, cafe au lait. But I mean, we've got another variety called Bethany Clare, and that's a very large sort of blue flower. We find it's probably slightly darker in the autumn flowering than in the spring flowering, and I think that's probably because it bleaches in the spring sunshine, whereas in the autumn it kind of holds itself better. It doesn't get quite so much sun in most years anyway. So Bethany Clare is definitely another one. And for a third, it's not always so reliable, but one called Autumn Tryst, and that's another one. It's a bit more showy, but it's a little bit less reliable. But that has it's like a mauve, very, very detailed sort of flower. So that's another one that's quite interesting. If you planted 3 together, I would suspect in most years after that sort of second or third year of being established, they would come together and you could sort of integrate those in a border. We're trying quite a few, so I'm always a bit careful which ones to sort of shout, because someone then grows the plant and says, "Oh, it didn't rebloom for me," and they don't every year. So some varieties we find are really reliable. And those are the ones, really, those 3 I mentioned. It's a good starting place for those. But yeah, you could plant all of these varieties and get just a little bit here and there if you left them to it.
Exciting.
I've just thought of another combination. Bearded iris is planted with nerines. They both love the same kind of baking conditions, and nerines flower probably from about September onwards. And there's some interesting new varieties that have been crossed with amaryllis, I think, and so you're getting something like amarine. They were grown originally for the cut flower market in Holland, and they are now becoming available as garden plants. And as our autumns are increasingly more benign, what better thing could you do? You get your Remontant irises, and you've got nerines coming through them in every shade, from white through to very, very deep pinky purple. Lovely.
Oh, I wish I had more room. Story of my life. Are there any irises behind you that we haven't yet been introduced to, Chris?
Well, there's a few. I mean, my wife Kate points out that we seem to have spent a lot of time lingering around the Siberian bed this year. Now, I know that sort of Seagate's put on the map over the years for its bearded irises, but we're trialing about 140 varieties of Siberian irises at the moment, and they're known as the beardless irises for I'll say obvious reasons. I'll try and show. There's not the beard running down the falls in the flower, you see. So these are really versatile plants. You often see them in large planting plants, particularly at the large shows, because you can put them in full sunshine or part shade, and they'll cope with pretty much any sort of ground conditions too. So they can be planted in, I wouldn't say boggy conditions, but somewhere that's quite damp, or in somewhere that's really, really well drained. And sometimes the vigour will be notably shorter if it's particularly dry. We divide ours here, and we don't water anything in the beds, mainly because if I start with that, that's a huge another job. So the Siberians here get divided and stuffed in the ground again, and they get on with it. So they're very, very tough plants, but they've got grass-like foliage. In fact, I brought a pot because I thought I'd show the difference, really. So they're very, very clean foliage. They don't suffer from any problems, really. So they keep green all year round, and then all year round, they'll go down to nothing over winter. And then you just take the dead leaves off in the early spring as you start to see some growth coming through, and you get these wonderful long grass-like foliage, and then the tall stem too. Now, this would be a lot bigger in the ground. You'd expect the foliage to be probably about 2 foot height, and then another same sort of height, another foot 18 inches above with the flowers. So they're great versatile plants. And my wife's talking me into dividing all of ours and trying to push them a bit more next year. And it comes in different colours. I mean, we've got one here called White Swell. So if you're looking for something if you've got part shade, using something that's lighter that might pop out might be better. So something like White Swell is quite good. Or we've got Sparkling Rose.
A lovely sort of dark amethyst. Oh, yeah, so, lovely yellow. Oh,
yeah, so
look at them together.
Again, you see that it's the same thing. You see, they're quite subjective, and there's so many different colours you can get with irises that, and like I say, it's not something I've really noticed to this year. But actually, if I offered a range of different ones, you could use these in almost any position really, and still keep with the colour scheme. So that's probably the most. That's why I've taught myself into the most hard work this year, is dividing them.
And which was the bluer that you're holding?
This one here, what was this? Caesar's brother. They're such good doers. Like I say, you do see them everywhere, but they're garden-worthy plants, and they're so robust as well.
One thing occurs to me, Chris, and that would be for people if they feel like, so minded to actually pay you a visit and see these plants when they're in flower, because the diversity between one plant and another is so great that people ought to be able to see them in flower before they choose them, I think.
Absolutely. What we do sell, we offer the most variety, if you like, by mail order. So people always say, well, that's okay, I'll look on the website at the pictures, and whilst we do our best to make the pictures as close to real as possible, you can't beat getting up close to the plant, and also smelling it, because one of the notably sort of unheard of things about iris, if you like, is the fragrance. Yeah. And I'm absolutely hopeless at noting fragrance. My wife says I'm awful at it. I started trying to say, the sweet smells, and she's like, that's not sweet. So I gave up. I gave up very, very quickly and left that. So what I always say to people, if they come to the nursery and the pockets of scent you get from different varieties as well, you can't translate that to a photograph or even describe it. So it's definitely worth seeing them in person.
Now I'm really sad that my irises are way too far back. Mind you, my irises are right in front of, it's like the electricity box or something. So I get sent in. I won't trust the other half in the front garden to read the meter. So I sort of tiptoe through to get to the meter. Next time, I'll have to make sure I time it with the irises and have a good sniff. Do you have any more of those lovely miniature bearded ones that we didn't meet before? Because there's a very enticing jar of them behind you, or vase of them.
Yeah, no, I think we've got this other variety here. You can't. This one's going over a little bit. This one's a I've been after it for a while actually, and managed to get hold of some last year. It's called Bangles, and I partly bought it for the name because for some reason Bangles just sat with me. I'm still a child at heart when it comes to names. And I've bought a lot of irises for that. I've got some out there. I've got one called Steve. I just thought it was fun, so I thought I'd have that. It's actually not that spectacular flower, but I thought for its namesake. But this is a miniature tall bearded, and again, it's a little bit different to there we go. It's a little bit different to sort of Petit Monet or Maslon. So it's a sort of in between, if you like. So it's a bit bolder. So it sort of carries itself in a bed nicely. But again, it's quite a small plant, so it's only about 18, 20 inches, something like that for us. And so it's good for front of border. It's delicate enough that if it's at the front of the border, you can see through it, which is nice. I think sometimes, the miniature tall beardeds, because they've got such short, fine foliage as well, they're delicate, but they still do enough shouty, if you know what I mean. So yeah, it's definitely a group of small.
I don't know what that was like in real life, but it on the video, the blue almost looks sort of iridescent, like a violetty luminescent thing.
It is, yeah, it certainly is. It's sort of it goes really faint as well through the centre. No, it's really nice. It's like I say, I was kind of bought for the name. But like I say, once you get me talking about irises, I'm away, you see. Every single one I could have a 20-minute conversation for. That's the trouble.
Chris, I've got a question for you. I mean, have you ever tried growing iris from seed? Bearded?
Yes. Yeah, we have. I'll be honest with you, we started doing it in the second year. I think we did some crosses during COVID. If you remember, that spring was long and dry, which was a blessing, of course, for all the people in lockdown, but I was here watering every day, and so I was kind of playing with the place a bit. We took some seeds and crossed a couple and set some seed pods, and we managed to get them to germinate. But sadly, we kind of neglected them a little bit, and we didn't bring them on to any size. So they need a bit of space to trial them. And at the moment, whilst we're still sorting the beds out, I haven't really quite got that. So I kind of let it go for the time. But it's interesting. You think when you cross irises, if you cross two colours, you get the same. But they throw all sorts of weird and wonderful different patterns and shapes and colours. So it's something I'd like to try.
How many years from sowing a seed do you have to wait for a flower?
2 or 3.
Yeah,
2 or 3.
It's not too bad. No.
Yeah, I mean, the breeder I spoke about earlier on, Gary, he's constantly breeding new varieties. And I think it's second or third year, really, is when he sees the first flower. And if you get a very good season and you can chip the seed early in the autumn, I think he's had some varieties that will flower in the first year. They're very vigorous from seed, so yeah. But we will definitely give it a go in the future because it interests us really. It's especially the children, something like a project for them to follow.
Yeah, exactly. Lovely.
I'm astonished. I would have thought that it would have been 3, 4, 5. I don't know. There's just something about the iris that makes me think it would be much, much slower. That's very exciting.
No, I think irises. I'm not sure particularly why, but have got a reputation for being slow growers. And it's not even a reputation, but I think they're easy to look at and assume that it takes a while to build that. Yeah. Especially with their big broad leaves, but they bulk up really quickly. We find there's actually few varieties that don't. Rather, you'd expect with over 1,000 varieties that there'd be notably hundreds of them that just aren't very good. But actually, there's only a handful that catches our eye as being a bit poor. They're generally very good, which is nice. At least they're rewarding then, and they give you something back quite quickly.
We've spoken at length about irises, which I know we wanted to do because of your massive association with having so many varieties. But of course, the reason you changed your name is because you are so enthusiastic about plants, unusual things, a much broader range. So you wanted to be a wider nursery, not just an iris specialist. And I'm not sure if you brought any along for show and tell today, but obviously it's a huge part of what you do. And yes, look behind you. Hiding behind Chris, a bevy of beauties.
I was just grabbing stuff and I thought, well, I'll put that in there just in case.
So are you drawn to anything in particular? Do you have a complete range alongside the irises, or do you have particular specialities? Yeah,
so a bit like the iris, it's where my eye catches, if you like. So last year we started the season with 3 Salvias, that we propagate ourselves. And then myself and my wife kind of spotted a few, and now we've got about 35 different salvias on our list now. And I did the same with asters and chrysanthemums, hardy chrysanthemums the year before. So I'm kind of letting ourselves run wild a bit with the list. I'm not looking for shade-loving plants because we're in full sun here, so we're absolutely south-facing and there's no shade. So my preference does tend to go towards full sun plants, and I like architectural plants. So one of the reasons I probably fell in love with iris is because they're simple names and they're very clean-looking. And I try and look for that in other plants. So I'm not afraid of big plants or plants that take a bit of work either. So last year, a few different salvias made it onto the nursery. I've had this one a few years, which I think everyone's quite familiar with probably, which is Salvia aurora Kirstenbosch. Now, my mum actually put me onto this, and it's unlike any of the other salvias we grow. It's I saw it sort of listed as being a dead-looking flower, and I can kind of understand that. I think there's more beauty to it than that, but they're an interesting plant, and they're not shouty. Yeah, so that's sort of probably one of my favourites now.
Whenever I see that flower on Kirstenbosch, I always think of brown suede shoes.
Yes, it's got that about it, isn't it?
Yes.
So a sort of, is it the calyces that are brown?
Yeah, every part of it. They're different shades of brown, really. And you can see as the light goes through it, if it was as the light goes away, so they darken up, but they don't really get that much light in the sun. So it's an interesting plant. I think you have to sort of take visitors to it to show them. I think it would be quite easily overlooked. But that's an interesting plant, really. I kind of grow it just because every year I have to talk people into buying it. And I quite enjoy doing that. Another passion of ours is the phaeums, the geranium phaeums.
Oh.
I know there's so many grown. This one, again, right in the very first week, my mum used to grow this. She was growing it for about a year before I took the nursery over. And so we very, very quickly added it to our list. And that's geranium phaeum Wendy's blush. As it goes over, it changes colour, hence the name. So that's another interesting one. We grow this in full sun or part shade, and it does just as well in both settings. And I mean, we put it on clay at home, and it does ever so well there too.
They're great plants.
They are one of the attributes, I think, for any plant has to be a good garden plant. Certainly the point of selling it anyway. I have plants that I sort of grow for my own love. But I think when it comes to the point of selling, you've got to kind of know they're going to do well when they get to the other end. But
well, yeah, I mean, particularly as a businessman, you want people to get plants that do well, because particularly if people are new into gardening and things die, it's so easy to get put off forever or not go back.
Yeah.
So
no, absolutely, and I think as well. I mean, we're fortunate here because we are just a small nursery, and we try and give every customer as much time and advice as we can. And I think that's important from a customer's perspective too. When they go to nursery, if they get just that 5 minutes of advice, it makes all the difference, because it comes back to the wrong plant in the wrong place, doesn't it? If I was to just let people walk out the door without any advice, and someone plants their irises in full shade, and waters them every day, that's not going to inspire them to want to grow irises anymore. So I think it's important from a business perspective too to push people and really give them the opportunity to sort of learn the right way, if you like.
Yeah.
But I often say, I mean, people say to me, "Oh, it's okay for you, you're a nurseryman." I say, "No, I'm not a nurseryman. I'm a nursery owner. I have very little experience. My first salvia cuttings I ever took was 2 years ago on the nursery. So everything's a learning curve."
Fortunately, you're a fast learner, Chris.
Well, I have a lot of luck. I think some stuff like it's been neglected.
So which salvia are you brandishing now?
Yeah, so this is a ever such a small flowered one. It's Salvia, I think you pronounce it Frerii. I can spell it to you. It's F-O-R-R-E-R-I. And I just find it interesting. It seems to be hardy. I think I'd plant it in a sheltered spot, being a salvia. But they're just the tiniest little flowers. They're only about a centimetre across. And you can probably see by the size of the plant, it's a creeping plant, and it's just a good doer. I mean, I bought this as ever such a small plant, and it's just making plants, which of course is great for me as a nurseryman. I haven't actually got any ready yet, because I never get around to finding the time. But it just, it's something that creeps along and just catches your eye. I thought it was quite an interesting little one.
And flowers of almost like a summer sky blue.
Yeah, they're kind of Veronica-y like flowers, if you like. They're very upright. I can imagine this in a bed, sort of creeping amongst other plants, and maybe not the front of the border, but amongst other plants in a nice hot spot. I can imagine it sort of just providing some ground cover, and then when it flowers, it kind of gives a bit of interest with it, about a foot tall.
Yeah, I can imagine that as well.
Yeah, well, that's a new acquisition. Like most of my things, like I say, are new acquisitions one way or another. So that's probably a less showy one, but actually something I picked up, or I can blame my mother for this again. She spotted this and she said, shall I order some? And I believe she ordered some Davey Watkins, I think is where the cuttings come from. Now, this is Salvia giant form, and at the moment it's my favourite plant on the non-iris side, because these massive, great, large blue flowers they couldn't be any further from the other salvia we've just shown you. I mean, they're absolutely huge, to give you an idea of size.
Yeah.
Now, I'll be honest with you, I haven't fully grown a plant yet, so I can't tell you how tall it's going to get. But already it's just so eye-catching, and everybody that's coming on the nursery at the moment is seeing it from afar in my stock plant area and asking when they can have some. So I think it'll be a popular one. We have one plant outside.
I know it will, Chris, because I talking to people, customers, visitors to the garden here last year, that was the one plant everybody wanted to grow. And I have to say, I've got seedlings. We potted them yesterday, so hopefully by the end of the summer it will be in flower. But I mean, it's a Salvia patens, isn't it?
Yeah, but we bought it as just a Salvia patens giant form.
Yeah, that's right. That's what it is. And it's, as you say, Derry Watkins sells the seed. But it was the one plant everybody was talking about last year. All lovers of salvias wanted this Salvia patens giant form, and you can see why, can't you?
Yeah, it's just giant, isn't it? It is what its namesake is. And I find the foliage quite interesting too, because it's got dark sort of splodge. I don't think I'm going to be able to do it justice on the camera, but it's got dark splodges through the centre of the leaves as well. So it's got quite an interesting foliage too. I can imagine, keeping it trimmed to make a bushier plant, it probably makes quite a good plant for the foliage itself. But you'd know because you're already growing it, you see. Very jealous. How tall do you find it in the beds?
I've only grown it from seed. They're still babies.
Oh, okay. So we've just potted up about 10 or 15 cuttings. Spring taking cuttings.
Yep.
So I shall let these go now and see what they make this year. I've got a lot larger stock plant outside. That's a better looking plant rather than one that's been pillaged for cuttings.
Yeah.
And it'll be interesting to see how tall it gets. But it's certainly worth the power so far.
Brilliant.
And I mean, we obviously add photos to the video version of the podcast because we want to try and show the plants to their best. But you can really tell with that one, it kind of sells itself even on a Zoom video, which says everything you need to know.
Absolutely.
So big and beautiful.
The cuttings themselves actually went straight to flower, so they were at that point. And no sooner had they rooted in a small 9 centimetre pot last year than I had this sort of stonking great 4-6 inch flower on top. And I fell in love with it at that point last year. So they've been nurtured over winter a bit. I really wanted to sort of see what I could make of them. But I can see this being something I keep on the list, avidly look after. So
it's the favourite child.
Yes, I think it is at the moment. Yeah, no, definitely. No, it's I think you fall in love with plants, and I'm not sure how other nurserymen are, because most nurserymen have been doing it for donkey's years compared with myself. But at the moment, we find, because every plant's new to us, I still get that kind of that excitement. Not only when you buy the plant and you make it into something, but taking the cuttings off and getting them rooted and then making more plants. Every step of the way at the moment is still exciting. And you can't beat that. It's I don't know, that's what keeps you going in the winter months, especially when you start propagating again in the spring. That kind of sense of anticipation just carries you all the way through 12 months a year.
Yeah, it does. You've encapsulated it there. I think whether you're a nurseryman or a nursery or a grower, a nursery owner, or just a keen gardener, that is exactly it. That is why loving plants and loving gardening is so marvelous and joyful.
Well, I think the best bit of advice, personally, humble opinion, best bit of advice I ever give to anyone when they ask me advice is to try it, because I used to work with an elderly gentleman at a small nursery when I was 16. I think that's where I got the bug really for all the mechanics of the nursery. I kind of fell in love with it, if you like. And he always used to say that the easiest thing is to do nothing. You make failures by trying. And so if you have something that, and you want to take a cutting or multiply it, just give it a go, because what's the worst that can happen? And if you've got 2 of it, just do 1, and 9 times out of 10 they work, and then you surprise yourself and actually you do something else and you find next thing you've got 2 tunnels worth of stuff and you don't know where to go.
I mean, this podcast, Chris, you have given me certainly so much FOMO. I came into it knowing that my knowledge of bearded irises in particular is extremely limited, and it's probably dangerous really for me to want too many because I haven't really got anywhere to put them. But you've actually increased. If you haven't heard of FOMO, by the way, it's just our word for that wonderful feeling you get, that absolute must-have feeling when you see a plant that you want to grow. I visited Westacre Nursery for the first time in years the other day, and it was such a wonderful afternoon. Their cafe, by the way. I mean, a nursery doesn't need a cafe, but I stopped halfway through. I was looking at all the plants, and I thought, I'm going to stop and have a coffee with my mum halfway through, and sort of topped up on caffeine and then hit for a second go. And the planting in the walled garden away from the nursery beds as well was really inspiring. They had an iris called Dusky Challenger, a really rich, ruffled, purpley blue, which was very dark and very eye-catching. So that went onto the list. It was actually roses. I had a rose revelation. Look at Alan. Well, the first excitement was Alan and I have been waxing lyrically about, pardon the neighbours, hand of the Baskervilles dog if you can hear it. We've been waxing lyrical about this Rose Jacqueline de Prey that we saw at the Chelsea Flower Show, which was wonderful. And Alan, if you're going to Westacre, I hope they have more than one, because if I've snaffled the last one, I might have to give it to you. Out of guilt. But I couldn't believe it. I was just walking up and down the roses and thought that one's beautiful, checked the label, and sure enough, it was that lovely sort of semi-double, pale, blushing rose that we'd been running on about after Chelsea.
It wasn't just the pale rose, was it? It was the eye of the rose.
That boss, those stamens. Oh.
Boss of red stamens. And when the petals drop, that boss of stamens is still there.
So beautiful. So I bought that one. But while I was walking around, I've never been one for mauvey roses, mauvey, purpley. They've never done it for me before. But they had this wonderful wall of Mannington mauve rambler. So obviously I can't have it because I can't put a rambler in my tiny garden. It'd be a disaster. But these lovely, small, semi-double mauvey flowers, and not too much white in there. I think sometimes when you get the mauvey ones with a lot of white, it really doesn't do it for me. But they were just so beautiful and ruffled and eye-catching. And then there was another, which maybe it wouldn't be too big for me, though it was quite a big planting they had, of William III, which when I was Googling it afterwards, quite varying different pictures came up, but seeing it as a big plant at Westacre, it was a sort of pinker, more cerise, but still on that mauve spectrum of roses. And I've just never seen mauve roses and wanted them before, but both of those really spoke to me when I was at Westacre, and I took copious photos, which I obviously will add to the podcast, and have written them down on my list. So it's quite the revelation. And I heartily recommend, if you are remotely in that neck of the woods, I mean, they're quite a long way from you, but why not just head up, just keep Westacre and then carry on up to Lincolnshire and come and see you guys.
Or you can come down to Lincolnshire. If you're coming down from Lincolnshire, you could call on the way and then come here.
Exactly. Road trip.
That's it.
A plant-themed road trip.
It's funny you should mention Westacre, because that's one of the nurseries we used to go to almost every weekend. Back then we had one child in a pushchair, and Kate was probably pregnant with our youngest, and we used to go around almost every weekend and go and see them. And the gardens there are absolutely marvellous. I mean, there's all sorts. It's like a little slice of heaven in there, isn't it?
So many interesting plants.
Yeah, it's lovely.
And they had Podophyllum spotty dotty, so I finally have spotty dotty in my life.
Is that a previous FOMO?
Yes. I've been wanting one for a while, and I didn't see it. I didn't see it in the shade section, and I had to go and ask, and there she was, lurking amidst the other plants. and I nearly missed her, and I got the last one, so I'm very happy about that. Chris, where are you at with your Flomo?
It was a difficult one for me. But I'll be honest with you, there's a plant I've been looking for now since about midsummer last year. And Alan will know it because I actually spotted it on one of the Get Gardening videos originally. And it's Salvia concolor. And now I was going back to your videos, probably midsummer last year sometime. And then I've seen it subsequently since in other people's photographs. And I'm just desperate for a plant now. So by the looks of it, it's a lovely tool. I'm never afraid, like I said, of tall plants. I'd like to try it one time. A lovely tall salvia. So it looks like it's got dark blues with mauve purple flowers by the looks of it. Alan will know. But I sent my wife on an errand the other week to try and hunt some down. And I know when I saw Tim Fuller recently, I mentioned to him because I know he grows it. So I'm hoping that something's going to come to fruition at some point.
I do hope you managed to get it. That is one you have at East Ruston, isn't it, Alan?
It is, and I'll tell you what, it's one of the few salvias that has remained untouched in the garden here for, I should think, 12 to 15 years, and it's still there.
Has it?
Yeah,
brilliant.
It's come through a whole range of temperatures and conditions and winters and all the rest of it. So I think it's an ideal plant to actually, I can't think of anything better that you could have wished for.
Well, it's the same thing. I know. I didn't directly see the plant, but I think you may have done an exotic plants video or something. I remember watching it last year, and then I remember looking for it. And like I said, I couldn't find it anywhere, but I know that Tim Fuller at Plants and Preference grows it. Yeah. And I've nagged him twice this spring and said, "Oh, are they ready yet? Have you got some cuttings yet?"
Well, the interesting thing is, Chris, you mentioned Tim Fuller because it was Tim who was in the garden one day that helped me name it because I couldn't find a name for it. And he said, I think it's concolor, or however you say it. And we have decided that is what it is. So, yeah.
Well, I hope you managed to get it. Sounds like it's one that's well worth adding to your ever burgeoning salvia collection.
That's how my list grows. You see, on a tangent, I see something and I sort of, go for it.
Right then, Mr. Gray, what's your Flomo this week?
Well, funnily enough, it's going to be a couple of bearded irises. Because listening to the man himself, the expert, wax lyrical about it, I would like to have some plants of Dawn of Fall, which is a remontant yellowy apricot iris. I would love to have that. And I can't help thinking every time you brandish Thornburg, did you say it was?
That's right. Yes.
Thornburg. Every time that comes out of the pot, I'm just thinking, I love it. Now, why do I love that? It's just so subtle. So, it reminds me of, I don't know what it reminds me of. Old ladies, I suppose. Old ladies in fancy hats. But I do like it. I mean,
I'm not sure that if there was a description.
But I think, all right, then let's give it a description, shall we say? I would say creamy parchment. That's what it reminds me of. Old-fashioned parchment paper and lampshades. Love it.
Yeah. No, it's marvelous. And I'm famed for loving sunset shades, and that's almost like the palest edges of the sunset. So it's definitely ticking boxes for me. I've also been coveting that one, so you can add that to my Flomo list as well. Double whammy Flomo all round, Chris. It has been wonderful. I feel like I probably repeat myself at the end of these podcasts because I'm just so full up of planty joy by the time we've been talking about plants for over an hour, and it is such a treat. Thank you for gathering all these lovely blooms and sharing all your expertise and your sheer enthusiasm with us. It's just such a treat.
That's no problem at all. Like I say,
I think also it's lovely when you get a nurseryman, a grower like Chris. He didn't want to be called a nurseryman. I know he told us that, but
it'll be a privilege if you do.
Well, I think that term has an enormous amount of respect because that is the person that actually has had his fingers in the soil. He's pulled the plants to bits. He's chopped them. He's propagated them. He's made more so that we can all enjoy them. And his knowledge is increasing the whole time because he is actually growing these plants. And I do find that very, very important. It's like when people come here, I mean, we don't propagate all our plants, but lots of the material that is propagated goes to somebody who propagates them for us. But so they are important that, you know, we have the plants that we propagate in the garden. Of course, like you, Chris, we're continually having and trying new things, like that Salvia patens giant form, and I wish mine was as big as yours.
It's worth saying, obviously, you mentioned mail order, Chris. So if people head to your website, they can, you know, have a good look at what you offer.
That's it. Yes, yeah, and also, of course, we use our social media to try and enthuse people into sort of getting hooked on them, if you like. So.
Well, I think you've managed to hook a lot of people today. Please come back another time. It has been wonderful, and also I like looking at that smart wallpaper in your potting shed. Until next time, happy gardening, everybody.
Yeah.
Happy gardening, everybody.
Take care.
I can see and hear you.
Morning.
It's always such a triumph when that happens. Look at all these lovely things he's picked for us, Alan.
I know. A bunch of beauteous irises.
I'm so excited. I'm so excited for this. It just reminded me of the cuttings I've got in bottles on the windowsill that I'm fairly certain the other half hasn't been keeping the water topped off on. So I know my first job after this podcast is to phone him up and ask him to check on my cuttings. That one, I'd have thought... Sorry, Alan.
Sorry, I was just going to say...
Salvia. Come on.
Lovely. Are you all right, Alan?
Yes.
I feel a bit frenetic today, if I'm honest.
Oh, no. Really?
You're going to enjoy me being part of it then. I'm uncontrollable at the best.
Well, from the top, let's see how
I think you like that, Chris.